Hey everyone, appreciate you tuning into this episode of The Wolf's Den. Today on this episode, I want to go over risk and how it directly correlates to success. So in every type of business, in every type of investment, risk is essential to one, creating more money, creating more opportunity for yourself, and also just opening some doors. But at the same time, risk, I mean, it's in the definition of the word, taking a leap of faith without knowing what end result will come from it is something that there's different levels of risk, and it really all correlates back to how much risk you're willing to take as an entrepreneur, as an investor, as a business owner, will directly correlate to what you get in return. So, for example, I guess you could think of a lot of things in terms of risk as financial risk. It depends on what type of risk that you are classifying this as, but in terms of business, financial risk is probably one of the biggest things that a lot of people are going to be thinking of. For example, purchasing larger vehicles, creating more overhead for yourself, having an office rent, getting a line of credit or a loan through a bank. These are all things that correlate risk to your associated business, and in return, it will come back and hopefully make you more money, but there's never anything that you can 100% guarantee for that. Hence the word risk. So in terms of just having a mindset that risk is essential to growing a business, risk is essential to growing your own your wealth. There's definitely different types of risk, the amount of risk that people take on, but personally speaking, some, depending on the year, depending on what's going on inside the business, I feel as though sometimes I could be a little bit more risky with certain investments than others. For example, as we continue to grow our fleet, to continue to grow our business, having to invest in multiple pieces of equipment for building out another crew, encompassing vehicles, tools, trailers, equipments. The more that you add to it, the more risk that is associated with the overall business. But at the same time, you can also create that much more revenue with those certain investments, and in return, it will make you more profitable, generate more revenue, and create a larger net worth for yourself. So and you can never 100% guarantee these things, which is the word risk. That's where that comes into play. If it was 100% guaranteed, then it really wouldn't be risky at all. But just understanding the calculated risks and not just going out there and swiping a credit card to swipe a credit card, or to get a loan just to get a loan, but understand the reasoning why behind it is very important. Going back to a budgeting podcast that I made, just making sure that these things are budgeted in your budget is very important, because if you're just going out willy-nilly and just purchasing all these types of things, then it really exemplifies and maximizes the risk, because you don't know how you're going to get that capital back or your return on your investment. So making sure that these investments, these loans, these equipment purchases, they are all calculated is something that I personally highly recommend. Obviously, I'm not here to give any financial advice, but just something that I personally like to do when it comes to taking that risk, or taking that investment, or making that investment, excuse me. So I guess you could also say, in terms of hiring employees, sometimes you could hire in a little bit more risky, maybe someone who has had as much experience or knowledge or professional training. That could definitely be a risk. But if you see them being a good, valued person that lines up with your core values, then time would only tell in that sense. So it's not always just capital investments. It could also be human resource investments, could be potentially a little risky. But just understanding the true understanding of the person's core values, if they line up with your vision as the business and where you're headed, that's really what it all comes down to. But all these tactical skills, all these tangible skills can all be learned over time. But if you find the right person, then that makes a world of a difference, because you can't change someone, but you could always teach them certain ways about doing things and onboard them onto the business. But really finding finding a good person, a respectful person that lines up with the core values, who's willing to learn, even though they may not have as much experience. If they line up with those things, then that would be a calculated risk. Another thing in terms of risk and the growth of a business is the amount of risk that you're willing to take on will directly correlate with the overall growth of the business. So if you're willing to take on more risk a little bit sooner, then, or in a shorter period of time, then that risk will directly correlate to faster business growth. Obviously, through that more risk that's going to be taken on in a shorter time, there could be a lot of things that can go wrong, a little bit more bumpy of a roller coaster, but at the same time, there could be a lot of great things that come from it. So it all depends on the individual, depends on the person who will be taking on that risk and what their tolerance of the risk is. So just being able to understand what your tolerance is, and you're going to have to experience this for yourself. Personally speaking, I had to learn what my own tolerance of risk was, just by making bad decisions, more or less. And that's just part of life. Things are going to come up that you can't always predict, and it's just a matter about learning from those things and then being able to pivot and move from there, and just being able to grow personally and professionally. So and some people are totally okay with slow growth and taking on little to no risk, or taking on little to no debt, and that's perfectly okay with your business model, or professional or personal. Some people don't like to get into debt for a car, a home. There's many other scenarios, but those are just the two that come to mind. But it all depends on which you want out of life and what your end goal is. So, and how quickly you want to be able to accomplish those goals. In terms of what I personally like to do is, I wouldn't say I'm on the high side of the risk side. I wouldn't say I'm on the low side of the risk side, but I'd say somewhere right in the middle. And it can fluctuate a little bit depending on the specific purchase, but more or less I'd say I'm in the middle. But that has correlated to pretty substantial growth. Just being able to keep up with it and not let it consume you or let it go over your head is something that's very important, and just being able to learn from those mistakes. So also, there are some ways of protecting yourself against risk, not directly from an investment standpoint, or capital standpoint, or human resources standpoint, but for more or less an insurance standpoint. So insurance companies are there to protect yourself and mitigate the amount of risks that a business is willing to take or going to take on, with all the potential threats out there that could possibly damage your business. So making sure that you have risk management associated with your business model is something that's very important. God forbid a vehicle were to get in an accident, or someone were to get hurt on the job, and other things out there. Just being able to mitigate this amount of risk and taking the appropriate steps to enact on it before it even happens is something that's very important for business growth. One bad claim that could happen, one bad instance that could happen, that could devastate and ruin a business. So just making sure that you are mitigating the amount of risk that the business is taking on, in terms from an insurance standpoint, is something that's very important as well. And I would highly recommend that everyone takes on an insurance policy prior to going into business, because it's highly essential. And that if you were to not take on that insurance policy, then you're just opening yourself up to a can of worms and risk that's absolutely through the roof. So just highly, highly recommend taking the right steps and doing things by the books in terms of the insurance aspect of risk. Personally speaking, I'd say one of the biggest or the riskiest things that I've ever done was, I'd say, dropping out of college to pursue my dream of becoming an entrepreneur. I mean, everyone thinks that having a college degree sort of gives you safety and security, which it obviously depends on what your life goal and the purpose of what you want to do in life is. But having that safety net of having a degree is something that I completely pushed to the side. God forbid my entrepreneurial career were to not work out. It's not something I could just lean back on and go get another job, but also going against the grain. And everyone says nowadays that you need to get a college degree. It's just not really the case. I mean, there's many dozens, hundreds, thousands of people that have become very successful without obtaining a college degree. So, but it's always against what society, quote unquote, society wants you to do. So I'd say, personally speaking, that was probably the biggest risk that I've taken, and just putting anything and everything that I've accumulated in terms of capital and investing right into this business, because I didn't know what would come from it. I just knew that I had a vision, I had a dream, I had a goal, and being able to take action on that and be willing to accept the risks that's going to be coming from it. It's gotten to me where the point I am today, but it's obviously been a bumpy roller coaster. A little bit earlier on was a little bit more bumpy than it is right now, but there's obviously things that are going to come up. You're going to have your good days and your bad days, but personally speaking, that was probably the most amount of risk that I ever took on, with putting my life in my own hands and my future, and also putting other people's future in my hand and taking on a lot more responsibility. So I mean, looking back on it, it's something that I don't regret by any means, but at the same time, it was very fearful and daunting and very intimidating going into something like this. But I saw the reward that it would come from it if I were to just stick through it and put my head down and just understand that I'm in this for the long game and not for the next 3 months. You never want to expect to get rich quick or grow a $10 million business overnight. That never happens. But just understanding the long game and understanding that this is all part of the process is very important to getting the most benefit about taking that biggest step in my career, as well as big step in taking on that risk. But long story short, with the premise of this podcast is just really understanding and making sure to take calculated risk in your business is very important, very essential, and just making sure that you're not going to be in over your head through one transaction, through hiring one person, or not doing this one thing, but just understanding the do's and the don'ts and the pros and the cons of each decision that you're making will create the best business model for yourself and get you to where you want to be at the end of the day. But appreciate you tuning into this episode. Hopefully you got some value out of this, and obviously I'm always willing to learn and hear back from you guys who are listening to this, what type of investment or what type of risk you've taken on that has benefited yourself, or at the same time what you've taken on that may have not been the best for yourself. So there's definitely things that we can all learn from each other, and that's why we're in this together as entrepreneurs, as business owners, as people in the green industry or hardscapers, people in snow and ice management. But again, appreciate you tuning in to this episode, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.